In 1951, Barbara Johns' strike was an essential event in the civil rights movement.
She led a massive walkout with the students in her high school, causing a turning point in segregation, changing learning environments for years to come.
The strike led to Brown v. Board of Education, which is one of the largest Supreme Court cases in the country.
In 1948, a Supreme Court case was held and the court declared that enforcing restricted housing for exclusively white people was unconstitutional. This case had a significant impact on the early civil rights movement.
That same year, President Harry Truman made a campaign appearance in Harlem, the capital of Black America. This was the first time a U.S. president visited Harlem, which angered many U.S. citizens in support of the segregation laws.
In 1949, the Equality of Treatment and Opportunity in the Armed Forces Act was established. This act stated that everybody should have equal opportunity in the military, no matter your race or religion. Barbara Johns was born in New York on March 6, 1935. Shortly after, her family moved to Farmville, Virginia, due to financial strain on her family. In Farmville, Barbara Johns attended Robert Russell Moton High School. Moton High was a school meant for African American students. The school had poor heating and cooling systems, which led to many students frequently getting sick. There were leaking ceilings and small classrooms unfit for the number of students attending. The school had no cafeteria, gymnasium, or auditorium with fixed seats. There were 477 students that attended the school, but Moton High was only built for 180 students. This inadequacy was common during this time period. In fact, many articles stated that Moton High was one of the higher-end schools for African American students.
Close to Moton High School was Farmville High School, a school for white students. Farmville High had better quality appliances, education, and the structure of the building was stronger in comparison to Moton High. One morning in October, Barbara was taking her siblings to the bus stop and realized she had forgotten her lunch. While she was grabbing her lunch, her school bus picked up her siblings, leaving her behind. Since her family lived 15 miles south of Farmville, she was unable to walk to school. All she could do was wait.
An hour later, Barbara was still waiting for a ride. Down the road, she spotted the Farmville High School bus, the school for white children. The bus was shiny, new, and half empty. Barbara knew that the bus would pass Moton High, but she was also aware that she couldn't ride it. The school bus drove right past her, but undoubtedly didn't stop. The oppression stung, and she knew that a change had to take place. Barbara later stated, "I decided something had to be done about this inequality, but I still didn't know what."
Barbara was aware that Moton High's Principal and Parent Teachers Association, also known as the PTA, had been working for many years to persuade the all-white school board to designate money to build a new school for black students.
She was uncertain that the school board and town officials would ever actually create a brand new school, even though it was required by law for separate facilities to be equal to each other. Her initial meeting was held in October of 1950 with her selected group of students on the cinder block bleachers outside of Moton High. The students agreed that the best time to strike would be during the spring. This would lead to an immediate situation, leaving the school board no option but to work something out.
Barbara and the students formed a plan to lure the principal outside of the school. The students selected the date and time that they were going to have their strike, Monday, April 23, 1951 at 11 o'clock.
On the day of the strike, various students left the school and stationed themselves in numerous places to keep tabs on the school's principal, Boyd Jones. At approximately 11 a.m., a student named John Watson called the principal's office to trick the principal. The unsuspecting principal departed the school in a hurry. Barbara deceived the teachers into an assembly by dispersing notes which signaled them to go to the auditorium.
Soon after, Barbara heard the sounds of 477 students gathering into the auditorium for what they thought was an assembly. The curtains opened and they saw Barbara standing behind the rostrum instead of Principal Jones. Barbara asked for all the teachers to leave and declared that the assembly was only for students. Once they left, Barbara held a speech and talked about the PTA and their incompetence of constructing a better facility. She announced that this inequality would never change unless they joined forces and took action on the matter. A student recalled her saying, "Are we just going to accept these conditions, or are we going to do something about it?" The speech emboldened the students, and they were moved to overpower the inequality.
During Barbara's gathering, a student from Moton High bolted downtown and started yelling that a riot had broken out. Soon after, Principal Jones figured out that he had been deceived, so he stormed back into the school, then abruptly into the auditorium. Principal Jones demanded the students return to class and said that this type of behavior would not solve their problems with the PTA. Barbara impelled the principal into returning into his office, and the students bombarded her with questions about how the strike would play out. Barbara settled them by saying, "The jail isn't big enough for all of us." Barbara Johns then led her classmates in a strike. They protested against the inequality in the Prince Edward County schools and the inadequate conditions at Moton High School.
On Saturday, 2 days after the strike began, a cross was burnt in front of the school. Cross burning is a symbol that is associated with the Ku Klux Klan, which is an organization devoted to the belief of white supremacy. These masked men were responsible for the acts of violence against African Americans. These acts of violence contained murder, shooting into houses, burning houses down, and much more. Reverend L. Francis Griffin was a pastor at First Baptist Church and maintained the role of the president of the local chapter of the NAACP, also known as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This organization was working towards racial equality.
Reverend Griffin caught wind of stories about Barbara's strike and was called to attend a student-held meeting at the Moton High Library. He arrived immediately, and the students asked what they should do. He advised them to do a student vote on what actions to take, making the strike completely student-led. Later in court, he was accused of making the students form a strike for his agenda.
Barbara Johns and Carrie Stokes, a student who helped form the strike, ended up writing a letter to Richmond-based law firm to try and get lawyers to help them with their strike. The NAACP-connected lawyers, Spotswood Robinson and Oliver Hill, met with Barbara Johns and the other students. Hill and Spotswood were impressed by the students' enthusiasm and how well they organized their strike. Because of this, the lawyers agreed to take up the case if parents committed to challenging school segregation.
On Monday, May 7, 1951, the NAACP filed a petition with the school board. They petitioned for the integration of the public schools. However, the students ended their strike that exact day. The school board undoubtedly rejected the NAACP's request for the integration of schools. Because of this, the NAACP filed a lawsuit in federal court stating that segregation was unconstitutional.
Over the summer while school was out, Barbara received death threats. To prevent any harm, her parents sent her to live in Montgomery with her uncle. The next school year she finished was in Montgomery. She applied for college soon after.
While Barbara was gone, the NAACP was pursuing many court cases regarding the Moton High strike. The Prince Edward County case eventually got to the Supreme Court. This case was merged with similar cases from around the states. These cases were from Kansas, Delaware, South Carolina, and Washington, D.C. The case was labeled Brown v. Board of Education and still remains one of the largest Supreme Court cases in history. The plaintiffs in the case were represented by Thurgood Marshall, who was an NAACP lawyer that had won 29 of 32 civil rights court cases prior to pursuing Brown v. Board of Education.
During the case, it was stated that segregation was a violation of the 14th Amendment. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. The most memorable declaration during the case was "Separate but equal will never be equal." On May 17, 1954, Brown v. Board of Education was officially passed, and the consensus was that segregation was unconstitutional. On May 31, 1955, a year after the landmark case, a case was held known as Brown 2. During this case, it was instructed that the schools had to desegregate with all deliberate speed.
After the series of Brown v. Board of Education court cases, the public schools were required to be funded by taxpayers' money to create a new school for black students. However, Farmville's community was not fond of these changes. The public thought there would never be a time when schools were integrated. A majority of the Farmville community considered this inequality to be a way of life that would never change. Eventually, the public school system brought their tax rate to only 50 cents per $100, which was the minimum tax rate at this time. The public school system formed a plan. The plan was to make elite private schools for exclusively white students.
After the public discovered the plan for creating all private schools, newspapers were created stating that many people believed that the black students would not opt for the private schools, but instead they would fight. However, nearly all of the white students had applied for new private schools, making the fight impossible to win. Eventually, all of the public schools' funds were cut off completely. The public schools of Prince Edward County remained inactive from 1959 to 1964.
There were numerous court cases going on about the Prince Edward County schools, along with many other schools around the country. In March of 1964, one of the Farmville cases made it to the Supreme Court. Once May came around, the court ordered public schools to reopen. Although it took many more decades for schools to fully integrate, it was an important turning point in not only education, but also the civil rights movement. Barbara brought attention to the matter and brought schools to where they are now.
Without Barbara Johns' strike, the civil rights movement would not have come as far as it is now. Thanks to her, we can go to school with the comfort of classrooms fit for the number of students attending, a cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium, and equality.
Barbara showed people young and old that they can make a difference, even if they seem small in the bigger picture. She showed people that you can create change if you have enough hope. She showed the world that no matter your age, race, or religion, you can do anything. Without her, not only America's education would be affected, but also the many countries that followed their lead. Barbara Johns led to one of the most crucial turning points in history.